Thanks very much for that, James. Well, welcome to this session in our ongoing series that's celebrating the centenary of the Baha'i Faith in Australia on the 18th of July. We have a very interesting presentation tonight by Yvonne Perkins. Now, Yvonne is a professional historian, and she obtained a first-class degree in history from the University of Sydney in 2010. And since then, she's gone on to offer professional services to those who want some professional research or writing done, but also in the digital era, uncovering historical materials that are available through these new media. So tonight is a bit of a technical session, but it's much more than that. I wanted us to learn about the resources we have available for uncovering the history of the faith in Australia. And I wanted people like Yvonne to show it to us, because this shows the types of skills that we have in the community. Now, tonight we're looking at a resource that focuses on Australia and the Pacific, but I am sure they exist in many different parts of the world. So these are skills that you can take into the future. We don't expect everybody to go out and use them as a researcher, but tonight you'll learn about this wonderful resource that is available to each and every one of us. Now, Yvonne and her family have recently returned from Sydney to Melbourne, where she's doing a presentation from tonight. And she has a blog called Profound History, which you can look up. It's called Stumbling Through the Past, I should say, is the name of the blog. It's a great name, Stumbling Through the Past. And she has quite a number of blog posts there about all aspects of history. So, as I say, Yvonne I regard as an expert in digital history, and we look forward to Yvonne's presentation tonight. So, Yvonne, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation. We'll all remain mute. You can put your questions in the chat section, and she can either handle them as she proceeds, or she can go through the presentation and we'll handle the questions at the end. So, Yvonne, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction, Graham. I'd just like to start with, I'm actually, having moved from the land of the Darug people of the Eora Nation, I'm now on the land of the Wurundjeri Wandun people of the Greater Kulin Nation, commonly known as northwest part of Melbourne, northeast part of Melbourne. Getting my bearings, I'm still getting, but I'd like to acknowledge the elders, past, present, and emerging, and their custodianship of this land that we're on. This is this acknowledgement of country is a real historical step in Australia. And as we go through this presentation, you'll see that there's been a very, very substantial shift in the understanding and the portrayal of Australian history. And it is reflected through this new version of Trove. I'll just give you a little bit of background about me. I actually learned programming at school and at university in the 1980s. I became a chartered accountant, and reflecting back, I always was that go-to person that people would come to with their questions about technology that they were really too embarrassed to go to the IT support, but I never laugh at, I mean, everyone's got to start somewhere, and I do really remember that first time in the computer lab with a bunch of boys that had been learning programming for 2 years, but because I was a girl, I had missed out, and I just had to struggle with them looking over my back. And so one of the things that I'm very passionate about is actually helping people of all backgrounds, of all qualifications, get familiar with technology and get over that fear, because quite often there is a fear factor about, like, you feel that because you're old, because of this, because of that, you're not capable. But there are little steps that we can do. I'm going to, this presentation is not going to be, how do you do this? For this, we really need a proper, workshop setting, which I would be happy to provide for people. There are resources available online. This is an introduction to this resource, and for people who have never come across it before, but also for people like me, they've actually just introduced a new version of Trove. And it's such a substantial change. I've actually spent quite a bit of time learning it myself. I had to learn it myself again. So all of us are basically on a fairly level playing field here. We're all learning this together. It's a very collaborative project, Trove is. I just want to also start too with a bit about this field of digital history. Now that digitisation and born digital documents, the ones that are created electronically, are now dominating our businesses and our governments. And so instead of having the written paper, it is now all electronically recorded and therefore archived. From the 1990s, the UK government was all digital. And so this actually affects historians substantially, because they need more and more to have technical skills as part of their toolbox. So there's still a very important place for the archive and for the, using the pen and paper that will, I don't think that will disappear. The hard copy is still important, but we're in this era of the born digital, and you've got the mass of digitized material, the mass of born digital material. We also need to supplement our things. So historians are now, quite a few are now getting into the field of digital history. I happened to do my honours thesis. I was doing that in the first year of Trove. And so I've been with Trove right from the beginning and, just found it's an amazing resource. It's also a really good source for Baha'i life in the past in Australia. Okay, so first I'll start off with, well, what is it? Okay, Trove is basically the combined catalogue entries and digitised records of all the state libraries of Australia, the National Library of Australia, and hundreds of other libraries, archives, galleries, museums, universities. They have all gathered...
Excuse me, Yvonne?
Yeah?
Do you want me to put that on the screen, or will you be doing that?
No, I'll be doing it, yep.
Okay.
Yep. So it is a massive database, and what is really important about it is free and it's open to access for all. And this is certainly when it began in December 2009, this was quite unique because other countries had gone down the digitisation path, but they'd privatised their archives. So they had sold their archival collections, like the UK censuses, are now accessible, but you have to pay for a subscription to Ancestry to be able to research it. Whereas Trove is free and open to all from all around the world. I will just, okay. So this is the page, and this is the URL, trove.nla.gov.au. So this is the homepage of the new Trove. NLA stands for National Library of Australia. So National Library of Australia manages this huge repository of historic data and also current data. But the state libraries in particular have done a massive amount to contribute to it and fund it as well. So it's really a very collaborative environment. It's 10 years old, and it's got, I'll just give you a look at the various categories. If you can see the categories. So we've got digitised newspapers and gazettes, which is probably, so these are government gazettes, but the digitised newspapers is probably what Trove is known for, best known for. But as you can see, it's not the only thing that is in Trove. So we've got magazines and newsletters. that have been digitised. So that's what that category is about, digitised magazines and newsletters. We've got images, maps and artefacts, research and reports. Now the books and libraries, that's about the catalogue entries. So if you see, and I've done this a lot as a researcher, I want to find an unusual book. I get into Trove and I look it up and I can get a list of all the libraries around Australia that have it, and I can find a library where I'm visiting or near me. It's got digitised diaries, letters and archives, music, audio and video, people and organisations. And then the last one is websites. And I'm not going to go into this, but basically the National Library has been archives any website that has got the .au suffix. So all of the .au domain is archived by automatically by the National Library. There's also a program that the National Library introduced pretty early on where they selected particular websites that they felt were of significance to Australian history. Now, that doesn't mean there was any judgment about how good, how worthy they were, but just that they probably had influence. And so my blog, Stumbling Through the Past, is actually, it hasn't got a .au domain, but it's archived under that program as well. But that's, I won't go into exploring that because that's obviously more recent, and we're focusing on the centenary of the faith in Australia. So I will be focusing on the more the 20th century, the 19th century and 20th century elements of Trove. Now, for people who are familiar with Trove, I mean, this looks just completely different. The change happened just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it's a major upgrade. It was required because there is now a requirement for accessibility. So that means for people that need to use aids for sight, they might have don't need an aid, a computer aid for to read out things, but they might be like me and read glasses. So there are requirements for contrast. So you've got to have your writing dark against a very light background. You've got to have a good amount of white space. And this is really important because the web is moving to actually really think about people all over the world that have got disabilities, and making sure that this web is actually a web for all. Another really important thing about the new version of Trove is this section, First Australians. First Australians is referring to the Indigenous people of Australia, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia. The previous version of Trove did not have did not really cater very well for Indigenous Australians at all. And this is, it's actually crucially important. And I'll go, and even though we might, some of us might not, I'm certainly not Indigenous, it's still really important for me to understand about the cultural needs of Indigenous people of this country, and to properly acknowledge and work with Indigenous people. So, for instance, the acknowledgement of country that I did at the beginning is actually become a very important element of showing respect in Australian life, but it's not the only way that we show respect. One of the problems that we have with historical documents, and you will find this in the digitised material on Trove, is obviously these are documents that were created in the 19th century and the 20th century, where they had completely different ideas about race and how to treat people regarding race. And so Trove is now set up so that Indigenous people, if they wish, can actually access a cultural safety unit where it will flag for them if there are images and names of deceased people. If there, and language, I mean, like the language that used to be used, like full-blooded, half-caste, etc., is now very offensive, but it is in those historical documents. And we've got to be very, very careful about sharing those. And so this is National Library is working through all of these issues with Indigenous people. and hoping to really include the Indigenous perspective of our history, because that's a very important part of our history as well, and it hasn't been acknowledged so well. One of the interesting things that they are doing is they're including, they're working on the languages of the first Australians. And last year was the year of the Indigenous languages worldwide, the UN Year of Indigenous Languages. So there's been a renewed focus on trying to revive the Indigenous languages, because there's a rich cultural landscape and historical landscape that we can actually recover if we actually revive some of these languages, and we can better understand our history. Okay, so I'll move on to a little bit more about, to give you a bit of background about the different categories in Trove. And the one that I think is, as I said, was most well known. And from having a look, I think that most of us will gravitate to this section for the Australian Centenary, because this is the one that's got the most material about Australian Bahai life in the past, and that's the newspapers and gazettes section. I'll give you a bit of an overview. This is some statistics, and just have a look. I actually found, like today, they've got 1,570 newspaper titles in Trove. That equates to 23 million, over 23 million newspaper pages. Researchers have found, like in 1988, they found a directory of newspapers in Australia. In 1888, where our population was massively smaller than it is today, there were around 600 newspaper titles in Australia. So there are over 600 newspapers in cities, in towns, in regions throughout Australia. And this was a very important means of communication and for people to actually keep in touch. And this is why we have got such a rich database, but you can imagine the amount of money and the amount of data that needs to be stored with that many newspapers. And Trove does not have all of the Australian historical newspapers. They are still digitising material. So one thing that I found in, in this list, you can actually find the titles for the different states. One thing that I found very interesting was the international tab. And there's actually, and I heard some people talking about Papua New Guinea, and there's some newspapers and gazettes from Papua New Guinea, East Timor, Thailand, Indonesia, and there's one there from the Philippines. So it's got a little bit of international material in that section. I'll come back to the more global perspective later. Okay, so we probably should, let me see. Okay, one of the other things that we need to keep in mind about this digitising project is what has been digitised. There has been a selection. They haven't digitised everything. And this is an article, this is a graph that was made in December 2016, but I think it just, it's changed since then. But I think this just demonstrates a little bit about what is actually stored in Trove and how we have to be a little bit careful about how we interpret what we find in Trove. What we find is there's quite a hump around 1914. So does that mean that there were way more newspaper titles in 1914, or the newspapers were thicker, so therefore there were more pages? What actually it means was the Australian governments decided that for the centenary of World War I, they were going to prioritise digitising newspapers from World War I. So you've got a much greater coverage of the newspapers 1914 to 1918 than of any other era. So it's these kind of things that we need to keep in mind. Now, also have a look at the cliff that is 1955. It just falls off on the right-hand side, a straight line going down there. And that is caused by copyright. Basically, from 1955, copyright laws apply. And so Australian libraries, Australian collecting institutions cannot just pick up a newspaper from 1960 and just, digitize the whole lot, stick it up online. They have to get permission from the copyright holder. And that is quite a long process. There are some newspapers like the Canberra Times is available after 1955. They've given permission for their newspaper to be digitised to a more recent date. And also, very interestingly, a Thursday Island newspaper is also digitised. I've seen some articles from the 1990s. But basically, for a researcher, we can use this wonderful resource, but we have to be very mindful that if we want to find something after 1955, we are most likely going to have to go to the archive and do the old-fashioned way of looking it up. So for communities doing community history, a lot of communities started after 1955. There will be limited material on Trove. But there's some wonderful material before 1955. Okay, so where do we go to get started? I'll just refresh that page. One of the things with Trove 2 to keep in mind, this is a brand new version and it's a very, very major new upgrade. With any major new upgrade, there are glitches. There are some things that don't quite work the way that you expect them to do. And there's a lot of ironing out to be done. Professional researchers like me, we've had our workflows quite upset by this new version, but it is important. We just need to work with Trove and be really understanding that this is a government institution, limited funding, they're doing the best that they can. Okay, so let's do our first search, and let's just do a simple search in all categories for the word Baha'i. And this is what we find. So we get a listing that's newspapers and gazettes, magazines and letters, images, maps and artifacts. So the word Baha'i, you can see there's some photos of the house of worship that's in the images section. Research and reports, books and libraries. There's a lot of material in there. Now, this search page only gives you a sample of what you can see for each zone. What you need to do is you need to click on See All, and you have to go into the zone to see all of the articles there. So we'll just do that. And there we go. It's picked up over 14,000 articles mentioning the word Baha'i. It's got it listed by relevance, and this is an algorithm that, that Trove runs to try and work out what is a more significant article that you would be more interested in. So, for instance, it will have things like, are there more than one occurrences of that particular word in that particular article? Therefore, the person searching Baha'i will be more interested. The other way of sorting it is we just click here and we can go to the earliest year first. Now, this is an interesting one, isn't it? We've got a mention of Baha'i in 1827. Now, we know there was no Baha'i faith in 1827. We know there wasn't even a Babi faith in 1827. This is in the very early years of Australian settlement. So that's all a bit odd. So we'll just click on this. And one important technique is using a Control F on your browser window to actually do a search, because with advertisements and with early newspaper articles, instead of we've got separate newspaper articles in the early colonial newspapers, they would have one great big kind of editorial column that might go for 2 pages, and they would have all different subject matter, news matter, in that one article. And be very disparate. So I've done a search for Baha'i. Where does that show up? And it doesn't actually show up anywhere. But what you can see is there's a whole lot of things like this particular up here. We can see on the right, it says Sydney, 4th of June, 1827. But then it's got this text on the left, and it says L/JJEY, which is nothing like Sydney. And this is why our search is not going to be a perfect search. And this is one reason why we're getting an incorrect response to our request for articles about Baha'i. Because what happens at the libraries when they're digitizing material, they have to scan it in. And if you remember back to the newspaper, the days of the hard copy newspapers, maybe you kept a newspaper somewhere. It's very poor quality newsprint and poor quality printing on it. And you can see and this scan is picking up, there's a few glitches on the left of that Sydney on the image. And what the National Library does is they apply machine reading of the text. And of course, the machine gets all very confused when there's like scrappy bits over the letter, like there's a scrappy bit over that N, there's a little thing, there's a glitch before the S, and it just gets confused and can't read it. This machine reading of text is called OCR, or optical character recognition. And it's a really good way of getting in a huge amount of material quickly and getting some idea of what is the content. But what is special about Trove is it allows people like you and I to actually correct that text. I'll go now on this page that I called up earlier. So I was searching Martha Root. There's a lot of articles about Martha Root in Trove. It's really fascinating. But one of the things that we come across again and again is Martha Root is actually called Martha Boot in Trove. And that's because of an optical character recognition problem where the capital R looks like, to the machine, a B. So the National Library has set up a system where you and I can go in and correct that. So this makes it much easier to see for other people. So I'll just, I'll cancel that and I'll just go in slowly. So there's this pencil there. I want to correct that. There's a pencil. I click it. And then I just go in and I click on that and I change that to an R. And I compare it to the image, because when we're doing the text correction, if there is an error in the actual print in the newspaper, we still need to type that in. So we should not correct the original typesetter and the original editor. We should only write in exactly what we see in the image. So I'll go save and exit there. And I'll do a check. So this is the article text. Then I will go in and I will tag it. And tagging makes things much easier to search on Trove. So no one's tagged this before. I'm just going to have a quick look at the article. And she's going to speak about the universal peace, how to bring it. Now, does it make any mention? I can't see any mention of the Baha'i faith here. I mean, it's clearly a Baha'i kind of topic, but there's no mention of the Baha'i faith. So I'm going to type in Martha Root as the tag, and I'm going to save it. If you want to keep your tag private, you can tick that. I don't want to. I want everybody to be able to find it. And I don't think, because it doesn't actually specifically mention Baha'i, I don't think I will add it to the Baha'i tag, because it doesn't actually specifically mention Baha'i. Okay, so that's like a quick text correction. And this is how, as I said at the beginning, the National Library and the state libraries around Australia and other collecting institutions have given us this resource for free. And I'm just incredibly grateful. I really owe them a huge amount. It's helped me finish professional work, do it really quickly and efficiently. And so I like to give back to the to Trove, and the way I do it is by text correction. And also secretly, I really enjoy text correction. I just find it really relaxing on a Friday night after a hard week's work. So that's text correction. It's very, very simple, and anybody can do it. Now, under the old version of Trove, you could do text correction without having a Trove login. I am not sure, I don't know if you know, Graham, if you need a login to do text correction.
Yes, you do. You need to, it's very easy to register, no cost, just register, and then you can make those corrections the same as Yvonne has done.
Yeah, so I might just like quickly go through that, because honestly, it's really worthwhile having an account, and you can keep everything private if you want to keep private. That's absolutely fine. But it just opens up a little bit more of this fabulous resource for you. Okay, so I'm in Trove. Oh, hang on, I've got to change my screen sharing. Okay, stop screen sharing, stop share. Okay, sorry, this is a little bit clunky, but I'll get back onto it. Share screen. Okay, so now I'm on a different browser and I'm not logged in here. Okay, so this is the login area. On the top right, you can see the word login there. And it asks for your username and your password. I'm Perkinsy, by the way, on all social media. So if you see Perkinsy, that's me. And you can create an account down here. Okay, so it's a very simple process. I'll actually share with you a little bit about what you get when I can find the, there we go. Okay, so I'll just share with you a bit of what you can see. So it keeps a record of the lines that you've corrected, the tags that you use. I find this is fabulous. So if you use a tag, you can just go into your private profile, and then you can find all the tags that you have ever used on Trove. And I find that very helpful.
So, Yvonne, can you just click on one? Click on Brisbane LSA. I saw that one there. Just click and just give a sense of what that delivers.
Yeah, okay. Brisbane LSA, one item, okay. Okay, so this is from 1949. So that's fairly early. And this is the article. So see how quick and easy that was. I mean, I just clicked on the tag in my profile, and it immediately came up with the article that was under that tag. It's called user tag. I am wondering if, Graham, I just noticed there is also.
I mean to derail you, Yvonne. I just thought a quick click on that one and then move back to your presentation. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Okay, so Brisbane LSA. I'm just experimenting. Okay, so there's only one. Okay, so let's pick that up. Okay. Okay, so now another issue that we have when we're searching is, and I mentioned this earlier, is that the editor may have recorded the information incorrectly, or the way that we would record something today. And I've got an example here of an article from 1872, and it's referring to Bahais Allah. that's actually Baha'u'llah. And when we're searching, particularly 19th century and early 20th century, the transliteration rules were not very solid. The Western observers in Iran, of events in Iran, were in an unfamiliar culture. And you can see that reflected in the newspaper articles. And so you have things like this. So the way around that, because as I said, we cannot change the spelling in our text correction. We must reflect what is in the image. But what we do is we do the tagging. So in this article, I've tagged it under Bahai. The Bab is mentioned, Baha'u'llah, and the Bab. I think I've mainly gone with the Bab. You can choose whatever tagging system that you want. I think one thing that is helpful is if it is an article about the faith, that we always put Bahai, so that we get one big tag with all the stuff about Bahai. But look, feel free to do the kind of tagging that you would like. Okay, so that's the tags. And then the notes. And this is, I've just been exploring this in the last few days. These are public documents. Anybody in the world can see them. And because we are familiar with the history of the Baha'i faith, we have greater understanding of the story, the history behind these particular articles. And so you can add what's called a note, and this can help other people can read these notes, and it can help them understand the newspaper, the original newspaper article that they're reading. So here I have written that Bahaya Allah in this article refers to Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith. So now I'm just, okay. Okay, and here is another text correction issue. So Martha Root has turned into Martha Roof. So I will just click that, save and exit, check the tags. Yes, Martha Root is mentioned in the tags. That's great. Okay, I'm just going to have to, my browser's running into my Zoom window, so I'm just going to have to move it down a bit here. Okay, so I want to move, so we've looked at newspapers and gazettes. Now we'll move on to magazines and newsletters. This is a new category in Trove. For people who are familiar with Trove, categories are what used to be called zones. So now they're called categories, and there are some new categories, and magazines and newsletters are one of them. And there have been some changes to existing categories. So the gazettes zone has been merged in with the newspapers and gazettes to form newspapers and gazettes. Okay, so what I've done is I've gone into advanced search. So I'm just going to go back and step through what I have done there. I've gone to the home page here. I've clicked on Trove up here to get to the home page. Then it's got this advanced search button. I click on that. Okay, and this is one of the glitchy things of that. And so sometimes if you've got a glitch, if it's not working, just refresh, like I just did, refresh your browser and it'll come back. Okay, so we've got magazines and newsletters. And I've gone into advanced. So advanced search, you have to decide which category you're doing an advanced search on. You can't do a advanced search on every single category all at the same time. Now for this one, I thought I would use search on public tag. So I've skipped the keyword. You can do your usual keyword search, but I'm going to do a search on the public tag. And the public tag Baha'i. And when do I want to do it? Okay, so I'm thinking 1844 perhaps to, no, I might actually do it later. I might do it so that I can, because I want to limit the amount of searches I get. So I'll start with 1920 when Mother and Father Dunn came to Australia and basically helped open up the Pacific to the Baha'i faith. And I will go through to 1980. And click search down the bottom. Now, and this is the magazines and newsletters that mention the faith, that have been publicly tagged Baha'i. So there might be others that have got a mention of the Baha'i faith in them, but nobody has tagged an article, so it doesn't appear in this list because I've only searched by the tag Baha'i. So I'll go into this one. So this is Deaths of Islands People, October 1968. So as I mentioned earlier, after 1955, you've got copyright that's come in. This is one of those magazines where the libraries have done the work on the copyright and have got permission to reproduce it and share it with us online. So that's quite valuable. Now, we go down and I've told you that like the magazines section, magazines and newsletters section has the digitized material. And so where is the digitized material? And I'm scrolling down, and this is what I think both Graham and I did, and we struggled. Oh, it's got, there's a tag there for Alvin Blum, so I'm really interested in this article, but I can't find. And then, but what you need to do is look for the read. So you see the image here, and then you click on the read button, and it says free access, view at Trove Digital Library. So I click on that. And there you go. So there's the article, and there's a picture of Alvin Blum, but I can't see anything in the text. And there's obviously Dr. E.A. Holland and Mr. J. M.M. Ramsey, but I want the bit about Alvin Blum. So I do the Control F, and I look up Baha'i, the word. Can't see that, so maybe I can look for Blum. Found it. Okay, so I go to that, and there's the corrected text about Alvin Blum I have found, and I can just, with my mouse, move this newspaper up until I find, there we go. And it talks about prominent Solomon Islands businessman, Mr. Alvin J. Blum died suddenly in Honiara on September 23rd. And this is in 1968. So this is an obituary for him and the Pacific Islands Monthly. Now you'll notice that on the left here, it's a little bit different. We can't do text correction for magazines and newsletters. You can only do text correction in the newspapers and gazettes category. But you can still do the, tagging. Oh, where did I do the tagging? Contents, tagging. Okay, and I can't find where I did the tagging. I did this earlier. Okay, but what I can show you is how to cite it. There's a cite button. So if you're ever needing to actually put a bibliographical reference, you can cite it. You can also click on this button in any zone and you can actually download the digitized material. So you can do it as a PDF, as a text, so you can read it in Notepad, or you can just do a one of the pictures so that you actually get a picture of the page with that article in it. So you can start the download. Okay, moving on. How's the time going? 8:20. Okay, so let's have a look at some gems, some things that we've done some work on. I'm going to do Baha'i, and I'll introduce with this lists, the concept of lists. Okay, so I've done just a general search on Baha'i, and you've got all of these categories up here. And then right at the end, on the right-hand side, there's this thing called lists. So I click on lists. And these are lists that have got information about the Baha'i faith in them. And as you can see, I've made most of them. So there's one Yerenbul somebody's made. And you can see that there's a variety of sorts of lists. So there's private lists. So this is one that I've created a list of material that's in Trove that I'm not sharing with other people just yet. So you can make your own private lists. We've got a public list here. So we'll just have a look at this public list. So this is a public list. I didn't create this. This person did. But I can actually have a look at it. I can follow the list. So if he decides to do some more work on it, then I'll get notified. I can also download this list, which can be quite valuable. But that person is the only person who can contribute to that list. In this new version of Trove, they've introduced what's called a collaborative list. And this is a list where we can have a team of people who actually work on a list together. And honestly, there's so much stuff about the Baha'i faith in Trove, and I don't have a lot of time. And so I've created these collaborative lists, and I'd be happy if people would contribute to them. Now, lists are a bit different to tags. Tags, I'm just tagging everything, and I use tags. I go into the tag, and then I work out what article I want in the list. Because a list is a curated, managed thing. It is one that can tell a story. I really like the fact that you can add a web page. So it doesn't even have to be in Trove. You can add a web page. And as you can see here, I'm thinking that people might stumble across this and they don't know much about the Baha'i faith. And you really do need a bit of a background to that to understand the news reports of the Baha'i and Babi faiths prior to 1920. So what I've done at the beginning is I've included the World Centre page about the life of the Bab, World Centre page about the life of Baha'u'llah, and I've just put in a note saying, you know, it's a good idea to read this. I've also put in a number of occasions, many of the accounts in Western newspapers during the 19th century were inaccurate, as the Western observers had a limited understanding of the teachings of the Bab and the culture of Persian society at the time. You will see this. You will see some things and you'll go, that is so wrong. That is so not what happened. But I think a lot of these articles really are a reflection on the history of the West, as much as they are a reflection on, even more so than a reflection perhaps on the history of the faith as it was emerging in Iran. We've got some very, very early articles here, 1846. This was during the time of the life of the Bab. And Western observers are in Iran and they're sending reports about this incredible religious movement that is sweeping through Iran. But they don't have the cultural understanding, the understanding of the society to really fully interpret what they are seeing. And sometimes also their values come through in their articles because they've got a particular perspective of life, the universe and everything that comes through. One of the things that really comes through is the Christian perspective and this understanding of the Bible as a holy book of prophecy, and how would this, what's happening in Iran, be linking to that biblical prophecy. So we see that. So, and also with this too, once again, thinking about this reflects on Western history as much as it does on Persian history. We have got a number of articles that basically say the same thing. So I'll just, it's a bit hard to see because these are newspaper articles all joined together in one heap. So it's a bit hard to see from the the summary that we've got at the beginning. But these first ones in 1846, all in April 1846, they basically came from an article from the Times in London in November 1845. I haven't checked that, but that's what the newspaper article actually said it was from the time, the Australian newspaper article. What happened was in the 19th century, particularly before the time of the telegraph, you had these Europeans that were on the other side of the world. Like they were 6 months very dangerous voyage away from their homeland. And they were yearning, they were very, very homesick, and they were very, very eager to hear the latest news. So that every ship that came out to the colonies, and it's not just Australia and New Zealand, but South Africa, Canada would have been the same, perhaps less so, but certainly South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, the ships would pick up the newspapers in England, then they would drop around to the Cape Colony in Africa, drop off some newspapers, the English newspapers, pick up some South African newspapers. And then they would carry some English newspapers, some South African newspapers to the Australian colonies. The editors would rush to the ships. They would get these newspapers because this was part of the material. Like we have today, we have an international news section in our newspapers or on our websites. They also wanted to have that. And so what they did is they just copied and pasted a lot of news from Europe into the papers. So while Australians did not have any direct or very little direct connection to Australia, they were picking up all these reports from the English newspapers about what was happening during the time of the Bab and Baha'u'llah in Iran. And the newspaper editors thought this is newsworthy material. They selected this material to print in the Australian newspaper because they felt that their readers in Australia would like to know about this, and they would also feel that it's important. One of the things, and so what I've done in this particular list, and I haven't done it in other lists, but when there is exactly the same article printed in a number of newspapers, I've still included it in this list because I think it's very interesting to have a look at which newspapers were printing these. Does this give us a feeling about that local community perhaps being more interested than another local community in these kind of religious matters? Is it a reflection of the interests, the particular interests of the editor of the newspaper? So it's quite extraordinary. We've got these early accounts of particularly of the emergence of the Bab and the followers of the Bab and what was happening through our Australian newspapers. And I'm sure that I haven't got everything in this list. And I think this is something that I've got 23 items in this list. I'm sure, well, I know that there's more. I'm being very careful about what I add to this list. So that idea that I had about, adding notes to help people understand, because there are some articles, and I haven't done as many notes as I would like. So I've done a little note here about the actual English newspaper that this report came from and where you can find out more about it. Because in the newspaper article, they called it the Atlas, and I actually thought, do you mean that they looked in a book of maps? That doesn't make sense. So I found out a little bit more about it. But I think that there is quite a role for interpretive notes with these particular articles, keeping in mind that these are publicly available. And in these notes, as you can see, I've linked to a website, so you can add website links so that the people can get more information about it. But I think even more important than, I think it's important to put these notes in these lists. I think it's actually even more important to add the note in the actual article, because a person who reads this article mightn't come to this article from the list. They mightn't see that note. So I've also put a note in the article to make sure that people do see it. And honestly, the spelling is just of Persian names is just so all over the place. It really, really can be quite hard to work out who they're referring to, what they're describing. So this kind of thing, I think, can be valuable. So yeah, look, I welcome if anybody wants to, get involved and helping me with that list, and with any other lists. I'll just go through the other lists that I've started. And look, we can start all sorts of lists. I'll go to collaborative lists. Okay, Greta Lamprell. Now, I have been, I've noticed that in this series, we're actually going to have, we're going to be moving on to the histories of the various states of Australia. And I've been, made it kind of my project to be following, tagging Greta Lamprell. She is a very significant early believer. She was the first Tasmanian Bahai. And she accompanied Martha Root on her travels. She ended up being elected to the National Spiritual Assembly of the Bahais of Australia and New Zealand between 1942 and 1954, served as a secretary of the National Spiritual Assembly, and she helped establish the Baha'i faith in Tahiti. And so as I always do with my lists, I start off with, and here I've got a Bahaipedia article that I've linked to, about the life of Greta Lamprell, as well as a history of the Baha'i faith in Tasmania. Because I think these lists are just so wonderful that you can add this context, and it's so much richer than using a tag. So what I do is I quickly tag something every time I come across an article so that I can search it again, but then I go through my tags and I carefully pick out particular items that I want in these lists. Now, in terms of how interactive Trove is, I have already referred to the fact that you can actually put a website that's not even on Trove into these lists. This Trove is part of an even bigger collaborative project, which is the web. And so I really liked, I'll just open this Bahaipedia article about Greta Lamprell. So this is a collaborative project. Wiki is a collaborative project where everybody gets together and they share. And I think really relating to what Vicky was talking last week about the Wiki tree and how that's a collaborative project. So here, somebody had already gone through all these articles from Trove. They'd already picked them up and put them in this. So what I did is I checked every single one of those articles, and some of them I hadn't picked up, some of them were not tagged. So I went into Trove and tagged them. So we've got this cross-reference and this across a number of platforms of collaboration, quite rich collaboration. And I think this is a big lesson also. As I said, I hadn't found these articles. Somebody else had, but I had no idea that they'd been found. And I think this is one thing always to keep in mind with this Trove project is it's very rare that you're the first person to find something. Especially if you find a newspaper article and it's all beautifully, like there's no text correction needed, highly likely that somebody's already gone through and corrected it. In the first version of Trove, you did not have to be logged in to correct text. You could do it anonymously. There's been people, I've been working on this for years, but I know quite a few people have been working on this for for quite a few years now. And that's just what I love. It's a real 21st century team effort on 19th century and 20th century history. It's just lovely. So yeah, if anyone wants to contribute to that Greta Lamprell project, there wasn't a wiki. I did check Wikitree. I couldn't find a Wikitree entry for Greta Lamprell. I did actually, let's go back to the, I did actually though find, and I put this, usually I put the articles in chronological order so that you can tell a story and you can see where a person is at a particular time and how their life has evolved. But I have put the obituary for Greta Lamprell's father at the top of this list as well. And I've put a note there because it helps us understand more about Greta Lamprell's background and reveal some genealogical information. So somebody can pick up that, get onto WikiTree and develop the genealogical information about Greta Lamprell. I've got another example where I have integrated the WikiTree, and that's on Hilda Brooks. Hilda Brooks, the first member of the National Spiritual Assembly, was elected in 1934, the first National Spiritual Assembly of the Bahais of Australia and New Zealand. So I've linked to the Bahaipedia article, and I've also linked to the WikiTree entry for Hilda Brooks. So I'll just click on it. Voila, there we go. Isn't that lovely? And that's beautifully sourced. I haven't actually gone through these Trove entries and checked those to see if I've picked up on all of those. That's something to do. But it's just wonderful how all of these platforms are able to be integrated so beautifully. I've only got 5 items on this list. I've tagged Hilda Brooks a lot more, but I was doing this in a hurry, so I couldn't get onto it. And I think one thing too, you'll notice that I've only included newspaper articles. Do keep in mind the other categories of Trove, and do search the other categories of Trove to see if there's mention of these people in other areas. I think there was for Greta Lamprell. I think there were some magazine and newsletter articles that were lists of radio programs because she worked as a nursing sister for the Department of Education, and she did some radio programs in Tasmania. I think, and that gets to as well, that background about people. With these lists, it's kind of, these are biographical lists. These are not just about the person and their Baha'i life, because we don't have a Baha'i life that is separate from the rest of our life. We live integrated lives. And getting some of that biographical information, like what the person did for work, and most of these are new and declared. They're first believers in Australia. What were their? Did they belong to a church beforehand? And as well as all the work that they did for the faith. One of the things I think is also very interesting is certainly with Hilda Brooks is the number of speeches that she gave. And the same with Hyde Dunn, and unfortunately I haven't put up a list for Hyde Dunn yet, but I've got a lot of material already tagged. So we've got this article. So I've done a Control F, I've found this, and then I click on it, and you see how the image automatically goes to where the text I've clicked on is. So that's, if you've got this great big page of all of these advertisements, do Control F, do a search for the keyword that you're looking for, go to the computerize the OCR text on the left-hand side, click on it, and that will automatically get to the newspaper page to where you want. And here is the talk that Miss Hilda Brooks gave on 29th of April in 1934, and she was in Adelaide. Now, I've picked up articles, advertisements for her. There was a lot of talks that she gave in Brisbane and in Perth. And it's just really interesting in this era when it wasn't actually so easy to travel. We're talking about that just perhaps emerging from the Depression. I mean, there's not a lot of money and technology is greater. There was quite a bit of travelling amongst the Australian Bahais, as they were really, really supportive of each other and were working to share the faith, very much like what we're doing at the moment. Working hard, sharing the faith. Okay, so I'm just going to pause a little bit and collect my thoughts and just make sure that okay. So I've covered OCR, tagging, and lists. And that's probably what most people do. I'll just show you a little bit of what I can do, which is a bit extra. And this is where the technical skills come in. And there's, and I don't expect, you know, you're going to want to do this, but at least you know about it. There's a thing called an application programming interface for Trove. And it's basically where it's the way that a programmer can connect electronically with Trove and through programming or extract a whole lot of articles. So you can't actually write anything, you can't text correct this way. But for researchers like me, we might need hundreds of articles to be downloaded. And you can imagine if we're going through, and I'll just demonstrate, I mean, it's very simple to download an article. If you are, you know, just interested in one, you just click on this download, see the arrow in the download, click on that. I want a PDF and it's preparing it and I can view it. There we go. So I've got the PDF of the article there. That's really easy. But can you imagine for researchers doing that hundreds of times for hundreds of pages for hundreds of days? It's really quite. It's very time consuming and that. And so, you know, what, you know, professional researchers can do is actually use this API and you can simply do a mass download. You can actually do, I mean, even more interesting things with that in the field of digital history. And you can get a mass download and then you can compare the data you've got from Trove, say from another digitised source. So maybe from Papers Past in New Zealand, which I'll give a plug to. They've also done digitise their newspapers and they also make it freely available to people. So you might want to aggregate those. You might want to compare electronic material that you've received from a number of different sources. And an example I had of that was I've been doing research on World War I soldier diaries. And there's been a lot of digitisation of soldier diaries, but quite a few of them were from typewritten transcripts of the original diary. So instead of going to the original handwritten diary, somebody years ago has typed up the diary and donated it to the institution, quite often the Australian War Memorial. But they've donated the typewritten material. But do I know if they have typed up every single bit of that diary? Do I know if they've missed stuff? Do I know if they have actually changed a little bit to hide something that, you know, they think would not be, they don't want people to see? So as a source, a typewritten transcript is actually not a very reliable source for a historian. But what I did is I downloaded the typewritten transcripts, did a search on Trove and found that the handwritten diary was digitised by another collecting institution. So I ended up having the typewritten transcripts and the digitised from the other institutions, and I could marry them up in a database together. So that's just one example of what you know, professional historians can do with these wonderful resources that are now available. One thing I also want to also, I think I've already touched on this, how archives are constructed. So an archive is, an archivist makes a decision about what is important to keep. A newspaper editor makes a decision about what is important to include or exclude from the newspaper. So any historical document that we see today has been deliberately collected, but also there have been other historical documents that we might regard as important today that has deliberately not been collected, getting back to the history of the first Australians. There's a huge amount of history there of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that was never recorded because it was not regarded as important. We know now it is important. So we just need to be very careful, and Australian historians have done a lot of work of trying to stitch together the Indigenous colonial relations in Australia, which were very difficult at times, but also at other times very supportive as well. But it's not just first Australians too. In the past, the lives of men were regarded as way more important than women. One of the problems that we have as researchers today is researching women. In the past, they were not known by their, if they were married, not known by their first name. They were known by their husband's name. And there is probably less variety in men's first names in Anglo-Celtic society than there are women's names. So which Mrs. John Smith of the many Mrs. John Smiths was this person? And I actually had a project where I had to research somebody called Stanley Smith, and his father was called Walter Smith, and there were 4 prominent Walter Smiths in Brisbane at exactly the same time. And 2 of these fathers had children at the same school with the same name. It was very, very difficult. We will come across this a little bit with our research as well. We need to be a little bit careful about, have we got the right person? The fact that we've got a search that's come up for, okay, John Peters, just as an example, does that mean it's our John Peters or is it some other John Peters? So we need to be a little bit careful about that. The other thing too, and I think this is, I love the story of Mother and Father Dunn at their age, just after the Spanish flu pandemic, and we know firsthand how horrific these pandemics are. It had just started to abate, and they decided to travel to Australia and establish the Baha'i faith in Australia. They were not wealthy, they were not young, and they certainly were not well known. And I don't think that they knew anybody here. Can you imagine just sailing that far? And their arrival in Australia is just mentioned in a passenger list. That's it. Now we know today that their story is incredibly important. I mean, look at this. We are here today, we're gathered today because of what they did. Yet, it was not regarded important at that time. So those kind of early years, there's a lot of stuff that is missing from those early years. So just keeping all of these things in mind, that there can be some other sources, and there's always missing sources that just weren't kept. One of the ways around this, particularly for if you're looking into the later years of the 20th century, is actually talking to the older believers and actually recording what they said. And the older believers themselves, if they are able to, write down what you remember, and please write down on the back of the photos with a pencil the names of the people in photos. This is an important part of the centenary, is actually collecting what we have in our private archives, what we have in our heads, and actually writing it down ourselves. Okay, so finally, I just want to go on about how significant Trove is. globally. Trove was started in 2009, December 2009. And I don't think the Libraries of Australia could possibly have conceived how popular it is and how much it is used from researchers around the world. I had a taste of that when I attended a conference for digital humanities. Now, digital humanities is just this wonderful discipline for people like me. And there's a few of us who have, initially we have done our commerce degrees. We've worked in accounting, marketing and things like that. But we've all had a secret itch. We've all wanted to do the history degree. We've promised that to ourselves. And there's actually a few of us like that. And we've all got a bit of a technical bent. But there's also lots of other people that, and it's digital humanities is not just for historians. It's for people who are in English literature, in architecture, in anthropology. And it's this wonderful collaboration. It was a very fringe. I think it's got a little bit more mainstream, but not quite in the academic arena. But certainly when I went to a conference in Canberra for the Digital Humanities in 2011, we were a small crowd. And we've got wonderful friendships, still from that day. And I've learned a lot from the other disciplines at these conferences, presenting how they express and how they research their disciplines and how they convey their disciplines using technology in a very nuanced way. So digital humanities is this is a discipline around it's a global discipline, and with a lot of enthusiastic researchers, and they're particularly strong on Twitter and on blogging. And that's part of the reason why I've done so many blog posts, and this Stumbling Through the Past is only one of my blogs. I've got a Stumbling Through the Future, which is my digital humanities blog. And I've also done guest blogging for, other organisations. Usually the International Digital Humanities Conference is in the Northern Hemisphere. And we miss out. And in a coup for Australia, we actually got the Digital Humanities Conference, came to Australia in the international one in 2015. It was most exciting to actually meet these people that we've been admiring and actually conversing with from afar. And this is the beauty of, social media, and that we've actually done a lot of learning just through social media. Has been absolutely fabulous. So this is like the experts in the field presenting, and it was just a wonderful conference. But what I noticed through this conference was the number of times these researchers were actually referring to Trove for their research. And I actually collected, I'll scroll down here, the papers which referred to Trove. These are all the papers. So you've got people obviously from the Australian universities using Trove, and you would expect that. But you've also got, where is it? University of Oxford, King's College, London, University of Victoria, Canada, National University of Ireland, University of Maryland. And this is just the major papers. I haven't included, there were lightning papers and there were exhibitions as well. Oh, there's a poster there from Indiana University. And I put in a couple of what were the minor mentions. This is a real global resource. And I referred at the beginning to this issue of, in some countries, a lot of this digitisation is behind a paywall. And we know from recent news how difficult it is financially at universities. And so what this particular researcher, she's American, working in a university in England. Her name is Melody Beals. I just love her work. And she's done a scissors and paste database collection. And so what she's done is she's actually looked at these repositories like Trove and like Papers Past of New Zealand, and she's actually extracted all of the the English newspaper articles and then put them into a database together. And as I said, that just the fact that these are being published, it's not even just the content that's interesting, but it's interesting to see what kind of topics were of interest. So she's got here transcriptions by theme. She's collected that. And this is, important for historical research. Another facet of Trove that is important nationally in Australia as well as internationally is the non-English language newspapers that are in the collection. And have a look at that list: Chinese, Dutch, Estonian, French, German, Greek, Indonesian, Italian, Japanese, Macedonian, Polish, Portuguese, Tetum, not to mention the ones of the First Nations of Australia. So if you want to look up, and I don't know that this is a complete list. So if you want to try another language, what you do to find a different language in a thing. Okay, so I know, the German, and there's been German settlers here, for as long almost as the English and Scottish and Irish. Kirche, that's German for church. I do a search and have a look at that. That's your German language, and 35,000 results. For that, you've got magazines and newsletters. Église, that's a little bit more difficult because obviously the French for church is also used in English. Neuve Église is World War I battlefield. But there you've got the Courier, Le Courrier Australien, 1892 to 2011. Wow. Okay, so they've got that digitised until very recently in there. So I think it would be wonderful. I have actually come across a couple of German language and French language newspaper articles from the 19th century that are in French and German. But my German's like really limited and I don't have any other languages. I think that'd be really interesting to explore. The other international interesting thing in Trove is the travellers that came from around the world, like Martha Root. Martha Root was just an absolute champion at getting media, interest in her story. And I've selected this particular article to just demonstrate how this collection that we've got is not just important for Australia, it's important for other places in the world. Because here, Martha Root is talking about her travels in South America. And she comments here, they have such delightful manners. And she describes this little boy who takes his father's lunch to where he's working on the road and will not put it down before he's knelt and kissed his father's hand. These comments of Martha Root's about South America might not be directly of interest to us in Australia for our history, but wouldn't that be interesting for a biographer of Martha Root? And wouldn't it be interesting for somebody from South America to actually see a little bit of their history recounted in Australian newspapers? And she talks about, there was a really good article, like how she was in war-torn areas. I'm not sure in East Asia. Here she crosses the Andes in winter by mule, it looks like. I mean, that's just a fascinating article. And this is how, on a Friday night after a hard week's work, you can just get totally absorbed by just reading the newspaper articles. You don't even have to do any, particular research. It's just really interesting. Okay, well, look, I think I have not looked at all at comments. I'm very sorry because I've just got so absorbed in what I'm doing. But I'll just turn the screen sharing off. That's probably why I stopped share. Yep, that's why I didn't see any of the comments. I'm sorry, because I had the screen sharing on, I couldn't actually see the comments. So perhaps I can address those in our discussion. But I hope I've demonstrated what a significant resource Trove is, and how lucky and grateful we should be that the Australian libraries have put in so much work into this one. And it's pretty easy to use. Now, I haven't actually, because you're not sitting in front of your computer and you're actually putting it into practice, you're just sitting there watching it, you might not have, quite, picked up everything about, okay, screen sharing again. Yeah, you might not have picked up, everything about how to do it, but don't worry about that. There's plenty of resources online for you to do. So honestly, give it a go. Go to trove.nla.gov.au and just start clicking. There's been nearly 60,000 people corrected text on Trove in the last 10 years, nearly 60,000, and they didn't break Trove. It's pretty hard to break. Just play around with it, give it a go. But there's also webinars that are coming up that National Library are giving on how to use Trove using basic and advanced search, browsing newspapers, navigating search results. And that's on Wednesday, 22nd. I think that's this Wednesday. And it will be available also as a video after the webinar. So don't worry if you can't, make it for that. It will be available. And then the following Wednesday, there's going to be another webinar about searching, privacy settings, collaborative lists, and what you can find in the new categories. Been waiting for Trove to settle down a bit after its new thing, so I'll write a blog post about the new version. I'm also happy if there is interest in helping with maybe doing an online workshop just with those people who are particularly interested in being hands-on. I would first give that webinar from the National Library a go, because I think really that should be pretty good, but call out if you want that. And I am happy, I didn't show you, but I am happy to do mass downloads. If you are, you've got, a lot of things that you want to download all at once, I can help you with that. So I'm happy to do that.